Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing a question that pretty much every long-term foreign resident of Japan has asked themselves at some point or another. And that is, how long am I staying in Japan? When am I going to move away from Japan? When am I going to go back to where I came from? For me, however, that's actually a question I've never really asked myself. I came to Japan on the JET program, or Japan Exchange Teaching Program, in 2002 and fell in love with the place and decided that I really wanted to live here. Came back after graduate school in the States to start my career as a university teacher, and all the time my answer to the question that people would ask me, hey, are you going to live in Japan forever? Are you going to move away someday? My answer was always, I'm in Japan indefinitely. I never really considered the question of leaving until now. And to discuss why I'm actually entertaining the question now, I have to first talk a little bit about culture shock. Culture shock, if you don't know, is basically the process where you go through a phase in a foreign country where you're questioning why you're there, you're having trouble adjusting to the culture. Maybe something has happened to you that makes you wonder if you can fit in and have a life in the place where you've moved to. And culture shock can happen at any time. Most commonly it's cited as happening 3 to 6 months after moving to a new country, because that kind of fun, exciting honeymoon period is over and now you're dealing with trying to adjust to the new country. But for me, I guess you could say I am going through a culture shock even now, 18 years into my residence here. And I have essentially 3 reasons. There's 3 reasons why I'm going through culture shock at this juncture, and I'm going to share those with you, and they explain why I'm asking that question. Should I leave Japan? The first reason is actually something that's been hanging over my head since 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and that is, there was a period of several months that if I had been outside of Japan, I would not have been allowed back into the country. Now, countries all around the world were doing this for tourists and casual visitors and even business visitors, but not for residents. Japan was the only developed nation that basically said if you're a resident, you're not allowed back if you're not a citizen. And for me, I mean, my entire life is here. I have permanent residency. My house and mortgage are here. My child's schooling is here. All of my bank accounts and investments are here. My job is here. I mean, I basically have no real presence back in the United States, where I'm originally from. My entire life is here. And I wouldn't have been able to return to it. What would have happened to my job? How would I have paid my mortgage? How could I have transferred funds between banks like I always do every month to make payments on certain bills, etc.? And as a result of that, it's this constant knowledge that if in the future there's ever any kind of incident or crisis that involves Japan in some way, I have all the evidence I need to understand that I'm not going to have any rights, even as a permanent resident, even as someone who's always done everything by the book, paid my taxes, lived my life as you should. So, yeah, the fact that I can be turned into a person non grata like that obviously has disturbed me ever since. I never thought Japan would do something like that. The second reason is more trivial than the first, but still goes to show how things can kind of snowball, come together and aggravate, the other reasons, and therefore make the culture shock seem even worse. And that is Japan's lack of normalcy. Basically, at this point, it seems like the rest of the world, except maybe China, has gone back to business as usual. I mean, just kind of accepting, okay, the pandemic is now endemic. It's now, it's here. We're just going to deal with it. We can kind of go back to ordinary life. And Japan, on the other hand, is still entirely masked up. I predicted back in May that Japan might become a masks forever country. Check out that video if you want to hear my reasoning. But yeah, still masks, still all the the restrictions that have to do with entering the country. Like, only recently they've said if you're triple vaccinated, you can come to Japan without getting a corona test. And just letting people into the country, the restrictions have been behind the rest of the world for a while in terms of opening up and loosening up. But the fact that everyone is still wearing masks outside in 30 degrees Celsius weather is pretty ridiculous. And still feeling like pressure that we shouldn't travel anywhere, we shouldn't make any plans to go anywhere. Plus, already seeing the effects of how the restrictions have killed places. I did a video about my recent trip for business to Nagano City. And Nagano City's, there's a lot of kind of barren wasteland where once there were nightlife spots. Bars and restaurants that had obviously closed, didn't survive the no alcohol policy or the early closing policies, etc., etc. And that's just, of course, sad to see. And kind of that end of the trip to Nagano left me a little bit depressed because of that. So that's why that's the second reason of culture shock. Japan's kind of inability to return to any sense of normalcy, yet seeing that happening in the rest of the world. The third and final reason why I'm experiencing this culture shock is the fact that Japan still has not opened back up to foreign tourists. They've still got these restrictions. You can come to Japan if you're with a tour group or if you have everything planned out by a tour agency. Basically, it's kind of like North Korea style tourism where you're going to be watched and have to stick to a certain itinerary and no deviation kind of thing. And most people don't want to travel to Japan under those restrictions, under those conditions. And that just harkens back to me for the treatment of someone with PR not being able to enter back in 2020. Moreover, that policy is still supported overwhelmingly by Japanese society. Like, I think it's still over 60% of Japanese say that they are happy that no foreign tourists are being allowed in. And again, that kind of makes me question and wonder about my relationship with Japan, the nation, based on, as a foreigner. Like, am I being looked at as someone who shouldn't be here? And I know that's unfair, and culture shock feelings, that kind of depression, will make you have a lot of unfair thoughts. It's mostly, I guess, officialdom that I'm griping against. In my daily life, I don't feel like I have any kind of discrimination or any problems leveled towards me as a foreigner, so I'm not saying I'm experiencing anything personally. But the fact that foreigners are still seen as like the danger of bringing the disease in, while Japanese are back to tourism, going to Hawaii and going to Europe and going here, there, and everywhere with impunity, whereas they're not letting anyone into Japan, no reciprocity in that sense. Again, it just makes me question like my place here in this society, and ultimately, do I not really have a place, or am I not really invited to the table that is life in Japan? And yeah, it's probably culture shock talking, but it's culture shock fueled by genuine reasons and worries. I mean, again, what could happen in the future? Is something going to go down where I'll be kicked out of the country because I don't want any foreigners around? I mean, it's something that felt like it would have been unthinkable in the past, but now is like maybe a possibility. So, at any rate, those are my thoughts on the issue. That's why I'm actually thinking about the question, should I leave Japan? Now, am I actually going to? Again, my entire life is here, including my career. and Japanese family. And so the answer is still no. I'm not planning on leaving Japan anytime soon. Nor do I think I'm really seriously contemplating the question. But I am contemplating it for the first time. And that's why I wanted to bring it up in a video. And I know I'm running the risk. Anytime you have a kind of negative take on Japan, there's going to be possibly people in the comments who are going to go off and like, well, it's their country. They can do what they want with their policies. Or, well, if you don't like it, just leave. Now, to the first point, if you take that argument of it's their country, they can do what they want, that's an argument that basically can excuse anything and everything. Like, you can say that for everything bad a country has ever done, ever. Well, it was their country. They're allowed to do those bad things. It's not really good reasoning. And to the second point, I completely reject the idea that as someone who has lived here for a long time, who understands the culture, who speaks the language, who has all of his, who has been paying all of his taxes. My money that I pay into the pension scheme is paying for elderly pensioners right now. My payments into the health system, the fact that banks are happy to take my money in the form of a mortgage payment and everything else. I've done everything right. I've always had my visas updated. I've never broken the law. I've never done anything that would endanger my right to stay here. And therefore, I soundly reject the idea that I have no right to say anything about the place where I've lived for 18 years. That's patently ridiculous. As an American, if you come to America and you go to America and you live there and you obey the law, but you have some complaints about the place, have at it. That's fine. I'm not going to tell you go back where you came from. Because we're all people at the end of the day. And we have our lives where we have our lives. And it's ridiculous to suggest that someone who's not a citizen is not allowed to have a viewpoint. So, okay. With that off my chest, let's hope for a happier video next week, and I hope to see you then. Peace.